seated. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I hope you had a wonderful lunch. We're going to continue on with the testimony. Ms. Sawyer?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Doctor, remember you're still under oath.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Ely, one thing I want to start with. You said on cross just this morning that $10,000 was what you felt you could in good conscience bill. Explain that to us.
I'm a physician. I take care of people at the bedside. This is not what I do. I was asked to look over a bunch of cases. It took a long time. And I guess have an internal conscience about how much I'm willing to allow somebody to give me to do something that I think is really a role that I want to provide to try and get to the truth. And I thought about this a lot, and I thought, I don't care how many hours I put in here, I'm gonna bill 20 hours, and that's what I put in there. But you can't do math backwards to figure out how much time I spent with each chart by how much I billed, because the math wouldn't add up.
And Dr. Ely, last Monday when you were here, was it just last Monday? It seems like it was longer. You talked about the fact on cross that your reports brought out what you thought was pertinent. Do you remember that?
Yes.
You reviewed all these medical records we went through before.
Right.
All right, and I'm going to direct your attention to State's Exhibit 30. And I want to direct your attention to this part of the document.
Okay.
What do you say about those medical records that you reviewed?
I listed them. I said that I reviewed these records, and I listed each patient and their age. And the primary goal of the doctrine of double, I go into the doctrine of double effect, but I'm not sure what else you're looking for there.
I want to direct your attention to the last sentence here of this paragraph.
Okay. I fully incorporate those records herein by reference.
So what does that mean to us?
What that means is that I said I reviewed all of the records, and I meant that I reviewed all of the records, but I'm not going to dictate every single thing that I knew about the records in the report. What I did when I focused my report was to try and bring out what I thought was the most relevant component to do with the fact of the medications that were given at the time that they were taken off of life support.
How long would your reports have to be to incorporate all of that in there?
I mean, it would go on for hundreds of pages. Nobody wants to read hundreds of pages. And plus, what I needed to get across was the truth that there's a way that we do things in medicine, and there's a way that we don't do things in medicine. And what I found is a very consistent pattern across these cases was that something was done that was extremely out of the ordinary from what we normally do.
Okay. Let's ask another question.
Sure.
Okay.
So in summarizing on those 1 to 2 pages per of each patient, what was your main goal?
My main goal was to try and, in a succinct fashion, portray the truth about what the patient was suffering from a disease perspective, and then get across that something was done that was not agreed upon by a DNR.
Your Honor, may we approach real quick? I know
You
we just
may.
took a break, but I think it's necessary.
Did you guys get to know each other yet? Y'all tired of me talking about getting to know each other?
cross-examination, Dr. Ely, you were asked or talked about the fact on cross that Mount Carmel seemed to use the Glasgow Coma scale. And it implied that they didn't use the RAS, the Richmond Agitation Sedation Scale. In your review of these records, did you find that they used both of those?
Yes.
And there was a lot of talk on cross-examination about the CPOT and 8, 10, whatever. You indicated, and I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification as States Exhibit 2F. 2F, do you see that?
Yes.
And these are records regarding who?
Ryan Hayes.
And I'm going to direct your attention to the page regarding this pain score. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
What was your point about it going from 0 to 10?
The point about going from 0 to 10 is that if you look at this chart, which takes place from the 2nd into the 3rd of April, and you go from 6 in the morning and then into the evening hours of the 3rd, there is an extremely consistent report that there's no pain being perceived by the nurses who are filling out the pain report, and that all of a sudden, at the time that this person got these medications in very, very high doses that were way above what they'd been receiving before, it seemed that all of a sudden there was this humongous switch in the amount of pain that the patient was suffering. I wasn't there. I don't claim to know what happened, but that is a very unusual pattern of clinical pain recordings right there. Usually you'd see 0, 3, 5, 6, back down to 3, then you'd see a pattern of something going on, but this was extremely consistent zeros, and then whammo, out of nowhere comes a 10. I mean, this is almost never seen. I can't recall very many times in my entire history of 30 years of practicing medicine where something like this happens, unless there's an outright procedure done that creates that amount of pain.
And Dr. Ely, if you recall, Ryan Hayes was the one with an anoxic brain injury. Does that make that, how does that affect that score?
Yeah, somebody with an anoxic brain injury, as was pointed out earlier today, would have a very difficult time manifesting pain outside. So that's why I wrote in the A, B, C, D, E, F bundle, the ICU liberation bundle, to try and assume that there's pain. We do not want anybody to suffer. That is my first and foremost thing as a physician, is I never want anyone to suffer. When it was brought up earlier that I learned from suffering, yes, I learned from suffering and how to try and address suffering. But if somebody can't manifest suffering, I want to maybe assume that they have some of it. But here, the person is not manifesting any suffering. I don't know how a person with an anoxic brain injury could all of a sudden go from 0 to 150 miles an hour with pain when their brain won't do that externally.
And I'm going to pull that page up a little bit further even. Dr. Ely, what pain scale does it say they're using at this time?
It says they're using the CPOT, which doesn't go to 10, it goes to 8.
Dr. Ely, when you were here before, there was some discussion on cross-examination about a patient who received over 14,000 micrograms of fentanyl. So I'm going to direct your attention to James Timmons. This is marked for identification as States Exhibit 11D. Do you see that?
Yes.
And what patient are we talking about?
James Timmons.
And I'm going to direct your attention to the very first entry regarding the fentanyl. What does that say, sir?
50 micrograms per milliliter.
And further down in the order comment, does it say what this is for?
I'm looking, sorry.
Order comment would be the very last line of
Oh,
that.
okay. It says for anesthesia.
All right, and I'm going to just turn the page and let you look at this. Does that appear to be for anesthesia during a surgery?
Yes.
How appropriate would 14,000 micrograms of fentanyl be for a surgery?
That could be very appropriate. If you're actually having your hands inside of somebody's body, depending on the type of surgery, Again, the whole thing about this dosing stuff is that we all have to get in our head that the dose should be appropriate to what the patient is going through. So if I'm going to cut you open and put my hands inside of you, then you might need a very large amount of medicine. But remember, you're on a ventilator. So if you stop breathing, I will keep breathing for you and it will not take your life. But if you give high doses and you're not on a ventilator, and it actually restricts your chest and you can't breathe, it will absolutely take your life, without a doubt. This person was being kept alive on a life support. They were not off of a ventilator.
The ones that we used to take medication.
If it was during an
Okay,
operation.
relax.
It's okay.
There was no question pending.
Dr. Ely, do you recall this morning when on cross-examination they showed you the exhibit for Sandra Castle, Exhibit 12, where it went through a series of fentanyl doses and then morphine doses? Do you recall
Yes.
that? You had asked at one point, when was she extubated?
Yes.
So I'm going to show you for what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit 12D. And who is this regarding?
Sandra Castle.
What does this, move it up one for you, what does this entry tell us?
Patient palliatively extubated at 1642.
And what date is that on, sir?
That's on the 13th of November, 2018.
All right, so just going back through my notes, would she have been extubated at the time on November 10th, November 11th, and November 12th when she received the fentanyl doses?
No, when she was getting those doses, which were much more modest, she was on a ventilator. And if they would have stopped her from breathing, she would keep getting breathed by the ventilator.
And is that appropriate dose at that time?
Yeah, I mean, this was a great example this morning of that there was really good palliative care going on at Mount Carmel. We saw over and over again today how people were very careful about not only the doses, but also about incorporating the family, and it was a great example of appropriate palliative care that we went through for 2 hours this morning.
And even the dose of fentanyl she received on November 13th, prior to 1642, she was still on the ventilator.
Yeah.
Now, there was a question asked of you that for Ms. Castle, the 1,000 micrograms of fentanyl was associated with palliative extubation. Is that correct? If that was given at 22:57 on November 13th?
That's after the time that she was palliatively extubated.
How would a dose of 1,000 micrograms of fentanyl affect a elderly lady who's been off the ventilator for a period of, I'm counting probably 6 hours? How would 1,000 micrograms of fentanyl affect her, sir?
That dose of fentanyl would take your life. It would stop you from breathing. You would not survive that dose. And I'm talking about even healthy people. But in her situation, there's essentially no chance of having more time alive after receiving that dose. And part of the reason is that it suppresses your brain's drive to breathe. But the other thing that it does is we get chest wall stiffness when we receive high doses of fentanyl. So if I have you on a ventilator and I'm bagging you, it becomes very difficult sometimes to deliver the breaths because your muscles tighten up. And at that high dose, not only would her brain say quit breathing, but her chest would say quit breathing too.
And that's another question for you. So on cross-examination, there was discussion about the fact that obviously palliative extubation, for those who die, you can't interview them to know whether it was painful or not. What does your experience and research tell you about how painful palliative extubation is?
We have had patients tell us that there was some pain involved with palliative extubation, which is why we do give 50, 100, 150 micrograms of fentanyl, which are below the doses that usually stop people breathing and below the doses that cause the chest stiffness. Don't forget, in addition to the fentanyl, that these people were also receiving hydromorphone, which is essentially like another 1,000 of fentanyl. So on top of the 1,000 fentanyl, they were getting another 1,000 of fentanyl equivalent many of them through the hydromorphone that they were given. So it's like a double or triple whammy.
So I know we talked about the conversion rate of morphine to fentanyl. What is it for hydromorphone to fentanyl?
Okay, an easy way to remember this, and you can find ranges of different numbers, but an easy way to remember this is that 1 of hydromorphone, which is dilaudid, is equivalent to 10 of morphine. Those are both in milligrams, which is equivalent to 100 of fentanyl. Okay, so 1 to 10 to 100. And so if I give 10 of hydromorphone, that's like 1,000 of fentanyl. And if I give 10 of morphine, or 100, and I'll forget the morphine part. So many of these patients got 10 of hydromorphone at the same time that they also got 1,000 or 2,000 of fentanyl. So you have to add all that up. And I don't know why you would do that, because we never give, we don't usually mix these narcotics like that. We usually go with one or the other. But to give 2 and also to give the benzo, there are a lot of literature. For 30 years, we've known in the medical literature that if you give these drugs together, they are
Objection, Your Honor, at this point, the question
exceeding.
is about the equivalent.
Okay.
We'll ask the next question, Your
Okay,
Honor.
sustained.
There's some
Disregard the
quest-
last section.
Some cross-examination regarding the fact that Walls's time of death at the medical records was 0132, and on the death certificate it says 0201. Do you know why?
No, I think that's not even that unusual, but sometimes people just don't pay that much attention to the clock, and we get off by
Your
some
Honor,
minutes.
he said he didn't know why. Move to strike the rest.
Not permitted.
In speaking of the death certificates and discharge summaries, there was a lot of cross-examination about that, the fact that the discharge summaries don't list the dose that these victims were given at the time they were palliative extubated. Is that unusual?
I think this is a very important question. No, that's not unusual. If you look through the medical literature, there are dozens of papers that have been analyzing hundreds of people's death certificates and then going back with pathologists doing medical examiners confirmatory tests of what were actually the causes of death. And the range very consistently is that the errors on death certificates from actual cause of death range from 30% of them having to errors all the way up to 75% of them having errors. So up to 1 in 3, up to 3 in 4 have errors on the death certificates. The key in this case, and all of these cases, were that most of these were filled out, and I failed to point this out last time, so sorry.
Objection, Your Honor, unresponsive.
I think it is responsive. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
These death certificates, for the most part, other than those who got a medical examiner, were filled out by the attending physician, which was pointed out many times. Those attending physicians would never have written fentanyl overdose on that death certificate because they didn't have any fentanyl levels, and they were only writing down the diseases that the person came into the hospital with.
Your Honor, objection as to speculation. He has no idea what they were doing.
Okay.
Okay, I can speak more definitively about
Stop.
it.
Stop. At the current time, I think he's okay. I note your objection. Let's ask a new question.
Why do you say that they would have no idea of the level of fentanyl given?
They had no medical knowledge of a level of fentanyl because it had not been checked. And they were clinical physicians, not medical examiners. And the way that we are trained is to write down the causes of death according to the diseases that the person naturally has. We have no ability to surmise a drug dose if we don't have a level, and we can't put it on the death certificate.
All right, Dr. Ely, if you remember last Monday, there was a lot of cross-examination regarding articles, awards, your curricula vitae. Tell us what at Vanderbilt do they would ask that you do as far as updating your curricula vitae?
Nobody really regulates that. We just put things on our CV that are part of our academic accomplishments, and mostly the focus is on our publications. and our job titles.
All right, and do you remember being questioned on cross about a 2019 Evangelium, and I'm probably not saying this correctly, VTATE Award for outstanding service to pro-life?
Yes.
You remember where it was indicated it didn't show up on your curriculum vitae?
Right.
All right, I'm going to show you what's part of State's Exhibit 30. This is part of your curriculum vitae, is that correct?
Yes.
Page 8.
Yes.
And I'm going to direct your attention to the middle of the page. What is that?
That's the award, actually. I thought it was on there, but yeah.
Okay.
So I usually put things like that on there.
All right, and there was a lot of talk about this as a pro-life award. And what was this award for?
Yeah, I am not involved formally in any pro-life organizations. I don't give money to pro-life organizations, et cetera. But I have done a lot of pro-con debates and written about, as was some of them put up, about the legal circumstance of euthanasia. And in the United States, euthanasia is illegal in this state. I'll just say in this state, and so I guess they gave me that award because I had spoken about upholding the law with regard to euthanasia.
All right, and I'm going to direct your attention to State's Exhibit, this is 30A. And this is actually an article about you receiving that award. I'd like to direct your attention to the second paragraph. And what does this say your award is for, sir?
Outstanding service in the pro-life movement as seen in extensive work in fighting for true, compassionate, end-of-life care that upholds the dignity of the person and the teachings of the church.
And Dr. Ely, again, there was a lot of discussion about different articles that you wrote. One was letter to editor, secular versus faith-based consideration. Was that on your CV?
I think it probably is. But I could be wrong. I mean, not everything gets on there. The CV is getting kind of long, and I might miss some things.
All right, I'm going to direct your attention. This is again State's Exhibit 30. And direct your attention to, this is page 76.
Yep.
Your CV.
Yes.
Direct your attention to line 49.
Letter to the editor, physician-assisted suicide, secular versus faith-based considerations.
So that one was on there.
Yeah. And I am very in favor of the secular part.
One question, so I'm going to have to ask you them. All right, and then the next one that they discussed was a doctor's prayer seeking saintly age, and again, going to direct your attention to your CV. State's Exhibit 30, is that your CV?
Yes.
Page 78,
Yes.
and I'm going to direct your attention to line 77. Is that article?
Yes.
And then another one they talked about was his enduring gift. What do we make of the Eucharist and transubstantiation? Again, State's Exhibit 30, page 77. Is that your CV?
Yes.
I'd like to direct your attention to line, hang on, 61. Do you see that article there?
Yes.
And a lot of discussion was made regarding a swimming pool in the ICU. That was on your CV, isn't it?
Right.
Why was that important for you when you wrote it, sir?
This man came to us with a heart attack and dying of pneumonia, and I asked the family what matters to him, and we have a whiteboard in each room with goals of care on it. And I left, and I came back in, and what he had said, they had written on the board. So they had written the word baptism on the board. So that was what he told his son and daughter that he wanted to have happen. I didn't think it could happen, but I just thought we could, sprinkle him with water. But the daughter said, no, we want a full dunk, and he wants a full dunk. And that was a very unusual thing. So the nurses gathered together with the family. They went out and got a pool at Costco. They blew it up. They put water in it.
I'm sorry.
And we tried to achieve...
Stop.
Yeah.
I think the question was, why was it important for you to write? Not a recitation of all the events.
Okay, overruled.
Go ahead.
This is all about why it was important to me. Because what's important to me is relief of suffering. And what it means to be a human is to be allowed to have the freedom to live our life the way that we want. And in this circumstance, this man wanted this very unusual thing in an ICU that required a lot of engineering to do what he preferred. And I wrote that article and published it in the Wall Street Journal because I thought it was a great example of medical people going above and beyond for the patient to do what they were asking for in their dying hours. And that's why I wrote it.
And the next article that was brought up was Sonnet 30, Love, Dignity, and Dying. And there was a lot of discussion on Cross about Jess's condition, and that many of the team in the ICU felt she was in hellish shape. What was Jess's condition, sir?
Jessa was a woman who had ALS, and she was on a ventilator. And the resident spoke up that morning, a woman, and said, this is hellish, why are we doing this to her? And the husband, and this is in the article, but it wasn't pointed out, walked up behind her and put his hand on her. She was embarrassed that he had heard her say that. And he said, I get your point, and I might not want this ventilator either. But my wife wants the ventilator, and she wants every day she can have with me. So she's the one asking for this life support. And even though the resident would have considered it hellish in her terms, the patient did not. And so what we have to do is never impose our quality of life on the patients and allow the patient to tell us what they want. That was the point of that paper.
And the last one I want to talk about is your article, Distinction Between Good Palliative Care and Intending Death, which the defense also brought up on cross-examination. So I've marked this as State's Exhibit 30C. Is this your article?
Yes.
And they questioned you about the doctrine of double effect. I want to direct your attention regarding that. And what was it in this article that you thought, let me see if I can blow this up a little bit more for you, where does it step over the line between comfort care and it not being the doctrine of double effect anymore?
Try and get this right. We intend good, but in intending good, we can cause harm. And the good has to outweigh the harm. The good has to outweigh the harm. The good cannot be accomplished by the harm. What many of these patients want is a good death without pain, but also more time with their loved ones. So I can cause harm if I intend death and shortening the life by depriving the family and the patient of any engagement, time to heal their wounds, their relationships, etc. So when we cross over this bright line from trying to reduce suffering to intending to end the life now, we have crossed over that threshold. It is no longer the double effect. This is not the rule of double effect, because now the harm outweighs the good. The good is accomplished by the harm, and the patient did not request it, and it's against the law.
And I want to point to the bottom of the page here where you say, if by contrast, the physician's intention of such treatments is to end or shorten life, physicians cross an ethical line that views, wrongly we believe, death-intending actions as legitimate form of medical care. Is that what you wrote, sir?
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about some of where we ended this morning.
Okay.
You talked about DNR CCA, which under Mount Carmel, as you've learned, is do not resuscitate, comfort care, arrest. What does that mean to us?
It means that we are going to withdraw support And the ladder that we're climbing for that patient now in our goals is to keep the patient comfortable and reduce suffering, but not to cure. So we've taken the ladder off of the wall of cure and put it over onto a wall of comfort.
All right, and I think that's DNRCC, comfort care.
Okay.
Comfort care arrest means that if they go in, you're going to provide full support, but if they go into cardiac arrest, you're not going to. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Leave it.
It is, but it's transitional kind of, so I'm permitted.
Prior to either of those being placed on a patient's record, DNR CCA or DNR CC, if there is a code, what is the obligation of all the team members in the ICU?
I couldn't follow that question.
Sure. All right. So if there are neither of these DNR statuses, and there is a patient who codes in the ICU, what must be done?
Yeah, if the patient's not a DNR yet, they're still a full code, then and the patient arrests, then we are obligated to provide CPR, cardioversion, chest compressions, and use the life support to try and save their life.
And in your experience, sir, are codes quiet incidents in an ICU?
No, they're very loud and disruptive and boisterous.
How many people would respond on a typical code?
15, 20.
And if there's a DNR CCA, do you keep, which means comfort care arrest, do you keep the patient on the ventilator if that's where the patient currently is?
Usually when somebody's a DNR CCA, they could still be on a ventilator for some period of time. It's not a rigid rule that they're always off the ventilator, but many times in those circumstances, they might be taken off the ventilator at some point. So I kind of can go either way.
And DNRCC, I heard you say on cross this morning, is when the family has made a decision to withdraw and you termed it support, so the ventilator support.
Yes.
Now, in your experience, what is the most important thing to the family when they are making that decision to withdraw support?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
I'll permit it based upon what he's doing here today.
I think there are two things that are usually front and foremost in people's mind when they're trying to make this decision for their loved one and acting as a surrogate decision maker. And one of them is, I want to be accurate in accordance with my loved one's preferences. So I'm doing my absolute best to approximate their decision, and usually it's in this case of comfort care, it's that my loved one would no longer want to suffer with these ongoing life support maneuvers. But the second thing that's on their mind is there any way that we can have time with this person to have any engagement as they're dying? We know that they're dying. The question is, can we have hours or days at all in this circumstance? And we don't know that at that time, but that's something that's usually on people's mind.
And you said...
Hold on. Ms. Sawyer, from now on, let's ask the question in the hypothetical.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, because that wasn't her objection, but just to make sure it's clean.
Sure. Absolutely, Your
Let's ask
Honor.
the hypothetical. It's a legal thing, guys. Relax.
You said they know their loved one is dying in your explanation for that hypothetical. So hypothetically, what are they basing that knowledge that their loved one is dying on?
They're basing that knowledge that the loved one is dying on what they've been told by the medical team and their own knowledge of what the person looks like. You know, they know this person in and out, so they combine, I think, their own assessment, their gut feeling, with what they're taught by the medical team.
And Dr. Ely, in your opinion, is it important to have full and complete information in making that decision?
Yes.
Dr. Ely, I want to show you some of the medical records in this case. And this has been marked for identification as State's Exhibit 4B. And I'm going to show you the bottom here. Who is this regarding?
Danny Millette.
Okay. And I want to, who is making this progress note?
Dr. Husel.
And what do they say down here?
Discussed grim prognosis with family at bedside. Family agrees to change code status to DNRCC.
So they're making their decision based upon what the doctor is telling them?
Yes.
Showing you what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit 8E. And what patient is this regarding, sir?
James Allen.
Okay, and what do we see here under the orders?
DNRCC?
Do not resuscitate comfort care?
Right.
What doctor is entering this order?
Dr. Husel.
All right. Showing what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit 11D. Can you tell us what patient this is regarding?
James Timmons.
All right, I'm going to move it down to the note. Who is making this progress note, sir?
Dr. Husel.
And what are they doing at this time?
He's the attending physician. And overnight, the patient remains severely acidotic. Is that what you want me to read?
What's the ultimate decision made by the family at this point with Dr. Husel?
To change the code status to DNRCC, patient pronounced dead at 3:13.
And what's marked for identification as State's Exhibit 13D? Who is
Rebecca
this?
Walls.
Okay. And what is going on with this progress note, sir?
Dr. Husel wrote it, and it says family in agreement with the DNRCC, patient pronounced dead at 1:32.
Slow down a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
So if you could repeat that a little bit slower, Dr. Ely.
Family called to bedside to discuss code status. Family in agreement for DNRCC. Patient pronounced dead at 1:32.
All right, I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit 1F. What patient are we talking about here, sir?
Joanna Belisari.
All right, I'm going to go to another page on this one. And talk about the progress note. Who is making this progress note, sir?
Dr. Husel.
And what are they doing at this point?
I've never seen this happen before. I'm noticing something for the first time here. The family decided to withdraw care, vasopressors turned off, patient pronounced dead. I never see all of these things in the same note. It's usually you make a decision, something happens, and then the death note is at a different point in time. I didn't realize this until just now, that these are all happening in the same note. It's really unusual.
All right, and when I'm showing you what's been marked for identification as State's Exhibit 3D,
Yes?
and what patient is this regarding?
Beverly Schertzinger.
And I want to direct your attention to the progress note. Who wrote this progress note?
Dr. Husel.
And what was being done at this point?
Grim prognosis with family members at bedside. Decision made DNRCC. Patient expired 2334.
You want to talk to me?
Will I have recall?
Well, that's another issue. That's another question. I think we should do an attorney thing over here for a second. Ladies and gentlemen, entertain yourselves. We're deciding whether to bring little toys in there for you guys to play with.
Oh, do the
Sawyer?
Dr. Ely, I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification as States Exhibit 5D. And the patient on this one?
Brandy McDonald.
All right, and I'm going to go into, what order is this?
This is a do not resuscitate comfort care order by Dr. Husel.
Okay. And States Exhibit 70, regarding what patient, sir?
Jeremiah Hodge. And
And I'm going to direct your attention to the progress note. Who made this progress note?
Dr. Husel.
And did the family members at this time agree to DNRCC?
Yes.
And directing your attention to States Exhibit 6C, what patient is this regarding?
Francis Burke.
Sorry. And again, regarding Francis Burke, I want to direct your attention to this order.
DNRCC by Dr. Husel.
States Exhibit 14H, what patient is this regarding?
Melissa Penix.
And directing your attention to this progress note, who made this progress note?
Dr. Husel.
And again, family members in agreement with DNRCC at this time?
Yes.
In your review of the records for Bonnie Austin, did you note that there was no DNRCC even entered?
I don't recall that.
You don't recall seeing that, or you don't recall that?
I don't recall one way or the other.
Okay. Doctor, during the course of cross-examination, it was discussed with you regarding the phrase "to a reasonable degree of medical certainty." Do you recall that?
Yes.
Your opinions that you said on direct regarding the fentanyl killing each and every one of these 14 victims, do you agree it was to a reasonable degree of medical certainty?
I do.
What do you base that on, sir?
I base it on the fact that that none of these patients had been getting doses. Well, no. I base it on the fact that most of the patients, I don't want to say none and never, I'm trying to avoid that most of these patients were not getting doses anywhere near that level prior to that escalation in that bolus, and that a human body that does not build up tolerance cannot sustain 1, 2, 3,000 micrograms equivalencies of fentanyl. And some of these patients had 1,000 of fentanyl, another 1,000 of fentanyl, and then 10 of hydromorphone, which is another 1,000 of fentanyl. The body cannot breathe after those doses, period, and will have chest tightness as well, most likely. And that's why I think it enabled that DNRCC note to also include the death in the same note, because they were all happening simultaneously. And that's the thing that I find alarming as I'm sitting here and realizing this for the first time.
And Dr. Ely, on cross, you were asked, but for the fentanyl, could you predict when Joanne Belisari would die? And you answered, no, I cannot. Explain that to us.
Well, I'm not God. I don't know when somebody's going to die. If I was allowed to give an answer other than yes and no, What I would say would be that I would be virtually certain that these people would have lived longer, because I know that they had imposed into their life course a lethal dose of fentanyl, hydromorphone, and benzodiazepine. In the absence of those drugs, there would not have been a median time of death of 10 to 14 minutes after the drugs. Usually we have people living for hours or days after we withdraw support, and the doses these people gave would not allow them to keep living. And there's also no other reason to give those doses unless you're trying to end the life of the person. I've never seen it done in my entire 30 years of medicine, ever.
And that same explanation goes for Ryan Hayes,
Yes,
for James Timmons,
yes,
for Beverly Schertzinger,
yes,
for Danny Millette,
yes,
for Brandy McDonald,
yes,
for Francis Burke,
yes,
for Jeremiah Hodge,
yes,
for Troy Allison,
yes,
for James Allen,
yes,
for Bonnie Austin,
yes,
for Sandra Castle,
yes,
for Rebecca Walls,
yes,
and for Melissa Penix.
yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Nash, do you have questions about the statements of Dr. Husel relative to the families? Is that what you have questions on?
Actually, Your Honor, I think given the narrow scope of recross, I'd like to just follow up on that statement with respect to death certificates versus coroner's reports.
I'll permit it.
Thank you.
Do you need anything?
I don't.
You said one question?
I don't think she said one.
I'm having fun, I'm sorry.
No, I know better. So I understand your testimony. When you were asked about the death certificates versus coroner's reports, your testimony was that in a exponential number of times, the coroner's report is inconsistent with the death certificate. Is that correct? That was your testimony? I want to make sure I'm getting it right.
You may restate what I said then? I can't figure out. Can you ask me again?
Okay. Relax for a second. Let her get her statement back out.
Okay.
And then she's asking you if that's true or not.
You were asked about death certificates written by attending physician.
Yes,
And then you were asked about coroner's reports, which are done by forensic pathologists. Is that correct?
yes,
Okay. Whose job it is to determine cause of death. Would you agree with me on that?
yes,
And I'm just trying to understand your testimony that you were saying oftentimes the death certificates don't reconcile with the forensic pathologist's findings. That was your testimony, was it not?
I want to be accurate in my answer. When the death certificates are reanalyzed by coroners, oftentimes they find causes of death that were not listed on the death certificate.
Okay. And so I just want to show you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit RH2. Do you agree with me that that appears to be the death certificate for Ryan Hayes, one of the patients in this case?
Yes,
Okay. And I want to focus your attention, if we can, down here, and I'm split screening for a reason, to the causes of death that are listed.
right.
Do you see those?
Yes, they had data on those.
Okay, and the attending is noted right there where my finger is. Would you agree with me on that?
Ortiz, yes.
Yes. And then I'm showing you what's been marked as Defendant's Exhibit RH3. Does this appear to be an autopsy report?
Yes,
Okay. And cause of death, right?
yes. It's going to
All
be
right.
the same, I think.
It's the same.
Yeah, because they had that data prior to the death, the clinicians.
I'm sorry, what?
The clinicians, I think, knew that he had had carfentanil. It was in the toxicology reports.
And that's what I showed you on my cross, was
Right.
the carfentanil that we talked about.
Right.
Which is determined as a cause of death.
Right.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Okay. Anything on that?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Doctor, you're excused at this point in time. Just hang tight right there for 1 second. Ladies and gentlemen, the jury, unfortunately, I have to send you home at this time. Okay? We'll get started at 9 o'clock Monday morning. You guys have a wonderful weekend. Get some rest in. Let's hope we don't get totally blasted by this front coming in. Okay? We're supposed to be in a parade Saturday, and I don't think it's going to happen. I just don't think we're going to be out there in the cold. Even if they have the parade, I don't think we're going to be out there in the cold. Ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful weekend. Remember the admonitions. We'll see you Monday morning, 9 o'clock.
All right.
Be safe and enjoy the families. Doctor, you're excused.
Thank you.
Have a safe trip home.
Appreciate it, Judge.
Okay, hold on, guys. Relax for a second. Ms. Sawyer, anything for the record?
No, Your Honor.
Ms. Menashe, anything for the record? Why don't you guys take the next half an hour, talk about our issues from this morning, and give me an answer on how you all want to proceed.
I think we spoke already. We might be able to approach.
Well, we'll do it in back.
Okay.
Because it's of those issues. Do you guys want the half an hour, or do you want to go back and talk?
I think we're ready.
Okay. We'll adjourn to the back then.